We are reaching the end of our journey together on the book of Isaiah. You remember how we did the various steps. First, trying to understand the man, Isaiah as a man, in history, so that our study of Isaiah is enrooted in the flesh of what is happening, of the event. Then the book itself, the book which has come to us, and that's all we have now as a testimony of his prophecy, of his word, of his action, also among his people in the city of Jerusalem. And then we went and tried to get the message of Isaiah. What are the main thoughts, the main themes of the book of Isaiah? Remember that we talk about the messianism as an important thought, an important accent in the book of Isaiah. We had other important views, the fact that God hides his face, right? This is also an important theme in the book of Isaiah. Righteousness, justice. These are the main themes of the book of Isaiah. And after we got exposed to those themes, we had a pause on, I think, what could be considered as really the contribution of Isaiah, that is his view on hope, on messianism. And we had a pause there, and we looked into a key text expressing his messianic hope, and the most important one being the suffering servant, the second part of Isaiah. Today we will conclude our journey, and we'll see how this book should affect our life, how this book is relevant actually, what makes this book concrete in existence and in our relationship with the world, in our relationship with each other. And I have entitled this section, Ethics and Existence. You remember that Isaiah, one of the characteristic elements of Isaiah is that he was a man who was in the city. He was not a man who left the city, left the world, like sometimes we see among prophets. Remember the prophet Elijah, he left. And some of the prophets had to leave because they were not persecuted. But Isaiah was not persecuted, at least in most of his life. He was well accepted. He was respected. People would ask for his counsel. He was an aristocrat, the nephew of the king, a prince. So he was really a respectable person and living in the city. So he came up with a look of what is happening, an eye on the life of the city. And so in spite of the fact that he was well accepted, was well adjusted in the life of the city, what is remarkable about this prophet, as we already indicated, is that he was also critical. He didn't just enjoy his comfort. He was lucid, and he was critical. And he was critical of the life he saw and the way people were behaving. So what is interesting and what is really special about the perspective of Isaiah, the accent of Isaiah, is his focus on the city. He lived in the city. He was a city man. So you should expect that he would focus on the city. And the city of Jerusalem is well present. And he is referring to Zion several times, which is the place of Jerusalem. And he is really, when you read the book of Isaiah, you can see that he is very well aware and very acute in his criticism and satires also of the people of the city. And it's not for nothing that the book of Isaiah has been called the great urban document of the Bible. Right? Talking about life in the city, you are in the book of Isaiah. Focus on the city. This is what we have. And what he saw in that city, what he saw in the life of the city, was not, of course, something very encouraging. So he criticized. He observed that justice, righteousness was missing. And this is, you can see that already in the metaphor, the vineyard, representing Israel. And you read, this is a text we have already read, but let me just come back in his own way, humorous and satiric way. He is describing the city, what it was. You know, my well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. All right? And so he expected it to bring forth. So he forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. So this is a city which was very promising, and yet frustrating, right? Disappointing. So this is what he's saying. So he is, especially in the first part of the book of Isaiah, first section of Isaiah, he's wrestling with the life of the city, with the reality of history, with the existence right here, down. And he in the history of the nations also, really what is happening right here. And as he is wrestling with the reality of life and history, he is laying down a scale of value, ethics, right? He actually is touching on 3 domains when he talks when he's really wrestling and observing and criticizing and talking about ethics. 3 domains of life. The political domain of life. Political life, that is the life with the nations. As you can see, Isaiah is not alone. Social life, that is the life of the individual with his neighbors or her neighbors. And spiritual life, that is the life of the individual and of the nation with the God of Israel, right? Adonai. So first of all, the political life. The life with the nation. This is what we call ethics. And this is not just an ethics which is supposed to rule the relationship with individuals. It's also an ethics which is ruling, which is also involving the nations. This is one also of the peculiarities of Isaiah. He is not just concerned with the individual or with his nation, but also at large with the international scene. So he is talking about, so you have, and he is not just talking about them as people who are out and far away. They are also, his concern. They are also the concern of the prophet as a religious person, as someone who received a message from above. So he is producing also ethics, which is not just concerning his people, but also all the people of Assyria, the people of Babylon, the people of Egypt, Moab, and he is also accusing them with of lack of ethics. So he's, for instance, Assyria is characterized with pride, with cupidity. Babylon with pride, with criminal behavior, with arrogance. Egypt with deceitfulness. Moab with pride and wrath. And so Isaiah is, when he thinks about these nations, he's concerned. They are also supposed to be a part of ethical concern. So they are not, nations which do not exist. They are also supposed to be involved, implied, respond to ethics, to the duties of ethics. And so Isaiah then is the spokesman of political ethics. If there is one person in the Bible who is really bringing some principles of political ethics, this is the book of Isaiah. This is Isaiah. All right. So, he's not just making accusations and observing the iniquity, but he's also threatening, judgment will take place. So politics do not go, blindly. There is a direction of history, and God is behind, and God is in control, and God will have the last word. And this is why every one of those nations will have to respond to God and actually will be judged. And so we have, for instance, in chapter 5, verse 14 and 16, right? We have, he's describing the nation. He says, people shall be brought down, each man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled, but the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment. So you have judgment, which is a part of the picture of the history of the nations. Okay, and the nations are rebuked. I'm going to read a number of passages today just for us to really be in touch with the word here. In chapter 17, in verse 12, woe to the multitude of many people who make a noise like the roar of the seas, and to the rushing of nations. So the nations are rebuked, as you can see. So he has ethical concern with regards to the politics of his time. And his politics is not just his political ethics, so to say, is not just an ethics which is based on his observation and on the problem of society. It is politics is based on religion. Has a particular dimension. It's not a politic in the vacuum of the social. Right? It's not just talking about social justice. His politics is based on religion. God rules. And the iniquity, for instance, he describes the iniquity. What is iniquity? Why did they failed in their ethics? And this is a thought which comes over and over again, because they have rejected the Torah. They have rejected God's direction. Right? In chapter 5, verse 24. And more than that, and this is the main problem he has observed, is that since they have rejected the revealed Torah, the Torah from above, the Torah from elsewhere, from outside, they have fabricated something new, which comes from them and from themselves. For instance, and then they said, God is with us anyway. There is a humorous, ironic statement in chapter 8, and this is the way we should read this passage. Chapter 8, verse 10. He's talking to these people, to these nations, and he says, take counsel together. You listen to the irony. You are taking counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak the word, but it will not stand. And what is the word? God is with us. See, that will not stand. It's not enough to say, oh, God is with us, to justify your iniquity. On the contrary, this is all the more worse. This is all the more bad. So this is what, but the problem is this is what they are. This is one of the problems he is observing. Not only these people are doing something wrong, they have rejected the Torah of God, but at the same time, and because of this actually, they have produced something else, and they expect then that God will be with them anyway. And that's the problem. And along the same line, and with the same in the same vein, in chapter 5:20, this is the result of this behavior. All right, woe to those who call evil good, and good evil, who put darkness for light, and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. So that's the problem. As soon as they have rejected the direction from outside, from God, they have reversed the scales. So what was good, they called it right, and what was right, they called it good, and that's the problem, right? Kind of a subjectivity here. They have produced their own Torah, their own law, and that's the problem Isaiah has with them. Okay, so that's the first thought. Then the first principle we are learning from this observation is that, according to Isaiah, politics should be deriving from God. Right? If you dismiss that particular dimension, then you reverse everything. Now, second principle is the second domain when he is dealing with is the domain of social life, that is the life with our neighbors. And as he's talking about religion here, he says, well, religion, all right, religion is based on our relationship with our neighbors. The relationship with our neighbors is a part of religion. It's not something which is separated. And justice, actually, is an expression of religion. Justice is an expression, manifestation of faith. And you have that particular text, which I have already quoted in chapter 1, verse 27. It says there, Zion shall be redeemed with justice, and her penitence with righteousness. Oh, you thought that Zion would be redeemed by the sacrifices. It's not what we are reading here. Okay. Zion will be redeemed by justice. And that's a very important thought. I will come back to this. And so religion is not sacrifices per se. Okay? Doesn't mean that, of course, Isaiah was against the sacrifice, but it was against the sacrifices within that context, when justice was despised, was neglected. So that it was so much so that God himself could not accept that religion, could not accept this sacrifice. And you read chapter 1, and especially in verse 11, 15, 16, 17, I'm going to read this. And God is speaking, he says, to what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me? There is no purpose. So your sacrifices have no value. I have had enough of burnt offering of rams. And so when you come to appear before me, all right, bring no more futile sacrifices, worthless sacrifices. That's what it means, right? Sacrifices which has no value. And then he explains more precisely in verse 15 and 16 and 17, when you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. So therefore, verse 16, wash yourself, make yourself clean. Put away the evil of your doings. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice. Reprove the oppression, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. This is a motif which comes over and over again in the book of Isaiah. And not only in the book of Isaiah, but among the prophets of that time, which seems then to have been a problem. You know, you read Amos, you read the prophets of the 8th century. So you have a society here of people who seem to have neglected the fatherless and the widow, and people who are perhaps concerned with being pious at the expense of being righteous and being just and being attentive to the suffering and to the poverty around them. See, so this is what we have here. And so this is so much so that it shows you how he understands things. The crime, the lies are not just crime, lies, or mistakes against people. They are actually interpreted by Isaiah as crime against God himself. Right? In chapter 59, I mean, you have already that in verse 15 with the text we just read. When you spread your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. So all this iniquity, all this injustice has affected God himself. He hides his face because of what is happening. And we have in chapter 59, verse 1 to 4, the thought is again repeated, the same thought. 59, verse 1 to 4, well, behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened, that he cannot save, right? But your iniquity, verse 2, but your iniquities have separated you from God, right? And your sins have hidden his face from you. So this is a part of the whole theology of the hidden face of God here. So that he will not hear. Why? For your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies. Your tongue has muttered perversity. Because of this particular ethical failure, ethical iniquity, God cannot relate to them anymore. And that shows again, that particular dimension which Isaiah is bringing to our attention, namely the fact that social life, right, religion, is enrooted, is connected with social life, is not separated from social life. You cannot be a good religious person and be a bad social person. Right? That doesn't work. That's what he's saying basically in his own word, right? You cannot claim of a relationship with me, God says, and having failed your relationship with your neighbors. And it's more than just failed, actually. It's talking about crimes here, lies, and really the contempt of your neighbor. Of the same thought, right? This is the reason why, for instance, when the Sabbath, the book of Isaiah, is talking about Sabbath in a very interesting manner. And so, when he describes his theology of Sabbath, it's associated with ethics. It's very interesting. You read those texts. Sometimes we refer to those texts. Say, well, this is the text about the Sabbath, but we don't pay attention to the context and what he means by that. Sabbath is also it belongs also to his ethical thinking. It's associated with ethics. You read. It's interesting. We have one of the key texts of the Sabbath is in Isaiah 58, right? You read in Isaiah 58, generally we talk about, we are focusing on the section, verse 13 and 14, when explicitly the text speaks about the Sabbath. If you turn your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, and so forth, and then you have the blessing. And then we stop there, and we miss an important connection, which is the connection with the context, because just before verse 9, you have, if you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger and speaking wickedness, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, and then you have a series of ethical behavior. And then within that, in parallel to that table, to that picture of ethical behavior or misbehavior, he says, if you turn away your foot from the Sabbath. So you have here, the perspective of Isaiah. Isaiah is associated the life of the Sabbath with the life with the neighbors. You cannot understand the meaning, the truth, the value of the Sabbath if you take away the yoke from your midst, and you are pointing the finger, and you speak wickedness, and if you extend your and so forth, right? If you do not satisfy the afflicted soul and so forth. So he's actually encouraging an ethical behavior in connection to the Sabbath, and this is kind of surprising, right? It's interesting also of the same nature or in the same context where he is dealing with the foreigner, the stranger, those people we may consider as people, we are not a part of us, right? So would be despised because they are different, right? It's interesting that in the context of that particular reflection, right, he also associates the Sabbath with the foreigner. You see, he says in chapter 56, blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man, who keeps from defiling the Sabbath, do not let the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord. It's interesting. Speaking about the Sabbath suddenly shifts to another concern, apparently. But it's the same concern. Because the Sabbath is the place when suddenly people become ethical, should become ethical, should remind. I mean, it doesn't mean that the whole week we can be unethical, and then on Sabbath we are ethical. It doesn't work that way. But the Sabbath should remind us an ethical dimension. And it's not just a religious. You see, religion here is connected with attention to the foreigner, to the stranger, to include him, because this is the moment when there is no longer a stranger, there is no longer a slave. Right? This is what the meaning of the truth of the Sabbath is reminding us. Right? In the same context, right? This is not for nothing. That in the same context you have that particular statement, which has become a classic. My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. Well, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that, well, we are together, it's all nations. That means that if it is not a house of prayer for all nations, if you are not a place, if the house of prayer is not a place where people who are different can meet, then it cannot be a house of prayer. So he is really, again, connecting the vertical dimension, the worship, religion, and the attention, being attentive and inclusive and accepting and praying with and being with, right, other people. If you are not able to be with other people, you cannot be with God. This is what he's saying. So that's his main ethical understanding. Religion and ethics are related. They belong together. And this is one of the, if you compare, I should say, biblical ethics and particular ethics, which we are understanding right now, and the way it was understood for instance, in the ancient Near East, you understand something. You understand then the emphasis and the particular perspective of Isaiah. In the context of the ancient East, let's refer, for instance, to the way ethics was understood in ancient Egypt. We have the principle of what has been called the Ma'at. That's the Egyptian principle of ethics, of justice, or of wisdom. Ma'at. Ma'at is an abstract concept. It's the capacity to be in harmony with the order, with the harmony, right? With nature, with creation, with the cosmos. This is an abstract concept. It has nothing to do with relationship. See, so this is what Ma'at is all about, right? It's a principle. This is made of rules. It has nothing personal, right? It's not even religious. Well, it's not because of a god, although Ma'at is also a god. But you don't have. It's not because of Isaiah. Is the word tzedek. Okay, tzedek. Tzedek, which means justice, which means righteousness. What does it mean, really, when you use the word justice and righteousness? Even in our language, in English, it's an abstract principle. I mean, it doesn't. Sometimes even it's a legal term, right? Not so within the Bible. Not so within Isaiah himself, right? In Isaiah, first of all, it implies a relationship with someone, with men. Okay. It is essentially relational. Tzedek is essentially relational. Let me read a passage here in Isaiah. Isaiah 30 and verse 18. Therefore, the Lord will wait that he may be gracious to you, and therefore he will be exalted that he may have mercy on you, for the Lord is a God of justice. Interesting. Talking about mercy, talking about being gracious, Why? Because God is the God of justice. So you can see that how the concept of justice is understood here. The idea of justice, the way we understand in the light of this text, the idea of justice implies grace and mercy. And the word tzedek has the two meanings, actually. It doesn't mean just justice. It means also mercy. So much so that even in contemporary Hebrew, when you say tzedakah, you give tzedakah, means you give the almonds, the alms, you give charity. Tzedakah means charity. It means justice, but it also means charity. You cannot be just if you're not charitable, if you don't have the mercy. Mercy, justice without mercy doesn't work, and mercy without justice is also impossible. So this is what we are learning. So tzedek, the Hebrew, the view of justice as it has been communicated to us, especially from Isaiah, is a relational quality. Okay, it's not an abstract principle. It implies relationship. It implies even compassion. It implies even feeling, emotion. It implies relationship. Right? You cannot be just if there is no relationship. Right? If there is no love. So that's what we are learning here. Okay. And this is the reason, by the way, before it is a relationship with each other, and that's also one of the originalities of Isaiah. It is, first of all, a relationship with Him, with God. And that's an interesting twist here. So you don't have this relationship with each other, with the neighbor, is made possible because there is before that another relationship. It has, this particular relationship of love and mercy with each other derives from another relationship. It is first of all a relationship, it comes first of all from God. Right? In Isaiah 51, verse 1. We just read the passage. For the Lord is a God of justice. This is the way God is described. If you want to be just with each other, you need to derive from your justice from the God who is justice Himself. Right? So let's read another passage in that sense, and that is 51 verse 1. Right? Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness. So you are looking to see what righteousness. You follow after righteousness. You who seek the Lord. So the God defines Himself as righteousness. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. So what we are learning here suddenly is that righteousness is first of all taken, from God Himself. So what you have here, well, and this is kind of it is very consistent with Isaiah's thought. God is defined as the Kadosh. He is the Holy One. Right? And if you take, for instance, by the way, if you just make a study on the word Kadosh, I think maybe I have a vague figure in my mind, but about 600 cases it is ethical. It is a moral character. Right? So when you talk about holiness, you're not talking about just something sacred. It implies an ethical behavior. And so what we have, God is holy. And only God is holy. That's a repetition. Only God. The holiness of God implies already the fact that He is unique. So you can derive holiness from Him only. There is only one God. There is not another one who is holy. And so what we have here is what we could call absolute ethics. It's not an ethics which is based on situations, on or even a relationship or an event. It's an ethics which is taken from the one who is at the outside, right? Who is unique. And your ethics is derived from there, right? So this is an absolute ethics here. And it's not a commandment of man. I mean, this is the problem we are having in Isaiah. This is the problem which Isaiah is really addressing. Chapter 29 of Isaiah. Chapter 29 and verse 13 and 14. What do we have here? Right? And their fear toward me is taught by the commandment of men. Right? For the wisdom of their wise men shall perish. So this is the problem he has. This is the problem there is that they have created ethics from below, right? From a human wisdom, instead of taking their ethics from the God who is the God of holiness, who is the God, outside. Right? So that's what, and so justice becomes then, in the language of Isaiah, justice, the practice of justice becomes like an incarnation of God. Since it comes from God, when you do justice, you bring God among humans. You actually affirm the truth of Emmanuel. God is with us, right? And so, just by doing justice, this is what Isaiah is saying here, right? And this is not an accident, I think, that God will judge on which basis? Not on the basis of your beautiful prayer or on the beautiful sacrifice. He will judge on your just actions, on justice. Isaiah 3 verse 13 and 15. Isaiah 3 and 13 to 15. Right? The Lord stands to plead and stands to judge the people. And what will he do? Is he going to see, how you have been able to do the right sacrifice and do the right offering or whatever? He says, for you have eaten up the vineyard. The plunder of the poor is in your house. What do you mean by crushing my people and grinding the faces of the poor? So this is on that basis that God is judge. Right? Now, for that reason, because ethical life is enrooted in our relationship with God, it has a religious dimension. It's not just a principle of ethics and not just social justice he's talking about. Because this ethics is enrooted in God himself, you should expect that in the book of Isaiah you have an emphasis on spiritual life. That will be my last point, on the relationship with God himself, right? And actually, what is interesting when he talks about spirituality, spiritual, right? In Hebrew, when you talk about spiritual, you have in mind the Hebrew word, ruach. All right? Okay? Ruach. That's the principle of, that's the spirit. Right? But this word has two meanings, by the way. This word has the meaning of life. Okay? You can see that. And Isaiah plays on that. You will see that. Isaiah 38, verse 16. 38, verse 16. He uses the word ruach there when he's talking about life. Oh Lord, by these things men live. Talking about life. And in all these things is the life of my ruach. You see, talking about life, he says what makes these people alive is that they have the ruach. They have this particular capacity to breathe. The ruach, right? And then another verse, another passage in Isaiah 63, verse 10 and 11. 63, verse 10 and 11. It says there, but they rebelled and grieved He's talking about God. He's Ruach. His spirit. Now suddenly Ruach has another meaning. It's not just the Ruach which makes you alive. It is the Holy Spirit himself. It is really the dimension of spirituality. So this is the very fact that Isaiah is playing on the same word to refer to those two dimensions, life and spirituality, is already suggesting to you what he means by being spiritual and being alive. You cannot be spiritual if you are not alive. And actually being alive requires you to be spiritual, right? So you are by nature a spiritual person. This is what we are learning here. And so this is why, spirituality is an important principle for life. And this spirituality has a number of manifests itself on a number of levels. First of all, Isaiah is talking about, God is talking about the inner man. In Isaiah 29, verse 13, this is the problem God sees among his people. Right? Isaiah 29, verse 13. These people draw near to me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but have removed their hearts far from me. So in other words, you can say the right words, okay, but the heart is not there. So spiritual life, right? That's what it implies. First of all, the fact that the inner person of yourself is supposed to follow, right? Spiritual life, the life of the spirit, the life of what you don't see, okay? The life of the Ruach should be a part in your religion. This is what we are learning here. And then another dimension of spiritual life is the dimension of trust and hope. We should trust and hope. This is a recurring theme. At the end of the chapter, the whole series of chapter 1 to 12, there is a song of praise in chapter 12, verse 2, where actually we are going to read this, chapter 12, verse 2, an encouragement to trust. 12, verse 2, I will trust. Just after, the whole description of God's salvation. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. Trust, actually, faith is a key for peace, for shalom. Chapter 26, verse 3. And I'm taking some classic texts, putting them in that particular context. Chapters 26, verse 3. You will keep him in perfect peace, because whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Right? So trust produces peace. And then this particular passage of Isaiah, which I like very much because I need it very much. I think you may be in the same situation as I am. Chapter 30, verse 15. Right? In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. It's not then in all kind of activity that your strength is on the contrary, on being quiet and rest. And so that's what Isaiah is saying. That's what spiritual life is all about. Okay? And so faith is not a magic manipulation full of activity, even sacred religious activity. Faith actually is trust in someone you don't see, right? And this is why the God of Isaiah is the God who hides his face. Cannot be the God which you have, domesticated, just as an idol. In Isaiah 45. Another on the same thought here, humility is important. Isaiah 66, right? verse 2. For all those things my hand has made, and all those things exist, says the Lord. But on this one will I look, on him who is poor and of a contrite spirit, and who trembles at my word. See, so this is what spirituality is all about. Trust God. And you cannot do that, of course, if you are not humble. If you think that you can do it by yourself. And this is the problem of Ahaz, you remember. This is the problem of politics. They rely on the horses instead of relying on the Word of God, on this invisible God. So this is what we are learning. So humility, and then we'll conclude with something else, which will certainly perhaps disturb you or surprise you. And it's a part of spiritual life here. I'm saying surprise you because very often we don't put that particular dimension in the context of spirituality, and so I'm getting your attention here, right? Very surprising dimension of spirituality, which very often is not expected to be there. Isaiah 29, verse 24, and then we'll conclude with that. Isaiah 29, the spirituality. Isaiah 29, verse 24. Right? These also who erred in spirit will come to understanding, and those who murmured will learn doctrine. The learning dimension. Spirituality without learning is not spirituality. You cannot be spiritual by yourself. You need to learn. You need to be in touch with someone else and learn from him. Now, in conclusion, after we've seen, this ideal picture of relationship, of existence, of ethics, and how you live, we need to understand where Isaiah come from, where his perspective come from. And ethics and existence receive life and inspiration not only from the God above, who is alive, and from the memory of what he did in the past, but also essentially in the book of Isaiah from the future. Interesting. That's one of the peculiarity, one of the characteristic perspective of Isaiah. Zion, the city of Jerusalem, is a city, which is the focus of Isaiah's attention from the very beginning. You can see that even in chapter 1. But you have it through the whole book of Isaiah. And at the end, again, he is with Zion. Again, he's describing Zion, the city. Right? That's kind of interesting. Zion concludes the book of Isaiah. Zion is the conclusion of the whole human history. And what is really amazing and what is surprising is that we thought that perhaps we would conclude history the way we started, with a beautiful garden and beautiful villa. No. We started with a garden, we end in a city. Right? And that's kind of interesting. We started alone, we end with people. And that's the ideal city. You cannot get to that ideal city alone, right? You have to be with. So Zion as a city where you have with many people, this is the ideal city. A city of ethics, all right? Social. You can read chapter 65 on. This is the way, this is where the city is described. So all this criticism, all these accusations, all this ethics, all this philosophy of existence is derived from an eschatological view. And Zion is called the city of righteousness. Right? So this is this eschatological perspective, this beautiful city when there is no more violence. Right? This is the way the city is described. It's quite interesting. It's not describing, by the way, that we will be happy and eat and drink and enjoy ourselves or have, the 7 virgins taking care of us as we have in some other traditions. That's not what we are talking about. What is interesting here is the ideal which is mentioned here is this cosmic harmony we are talking about here is that there is no more hurt, no more violence, and most importantly, no more killing. And it's interesting that those two passages which really describe the ideal ethical life in the ideal Zion, right? We have it in two passages, chapter 11, verse 7, right? Chapter 11, verse 7. The cow and the bear shall graze. Well, that means that the bear is not going to eat the cow. That's what it means. Right? You look at the other passage which echoes that one, and it is found in 55 verse 24 and 25. Right? I think Isaiah 55, right? 24, 25. Sorry, that's not 55. The wolf and the lamb. 65. Sorry, it's at the end of the book, right? 65, and more precisely verse 25. Here we have the wolf and the lamb will fit together. Well, what does that mean? They fit together. Well, it doesn't mean. It simply means that the wolf is not going to eat the lamb. And so, the lion shall eat straw like the ox. So they don't eat each other anymore. Right? And by the way, this vegetarian regime, right, which is promoted here, it's interesting. It's not a regime which is promoted in order to get holier. It's a regime which is promoted in order to say that there is no killing anymore. So vegetarianism is presented here as an ethical principle. Right? Kind of affirming the idea of not killing. Life is sacred. This is what we are. This is the idea. And so, what is interesting is that all this great ideal of ethics, no more violence, peace, should affect our life. So you have here an ethics which is not taken from the situation in the present, which is not inspired within the situation of the present, which is inspired from a situation which is utopia, which is not here, which no one has even dreamed, which is the city of Zion in the future. So the future of Zion in the future, eschatological picture, is invading our present here, right? And so this impact, if we could take the lesson from there, I think the future comes to the present and shapes our present and helps us. I'm putting myself now in the skins of the people who are listening to the message of Isaiah. So it should tell me how I should behave. Otherwise, if I'm not behaving that way, then there will be judgment. And this is the way the book of Isaiah is concluding, by the way. This is the last thought of Isaiah is terrible, by the way. It's not very, very nice. we don't. And they shall go forth and look upon the corpses of the men who have transgressed against me, for their worm does not die, and the fire is not quenched. There shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. So that's judgment forever. In other words, there is no way we can survive, right, if we don't let ourselves conducted by this ideal which is proposed here, which is the ideal of absolute ethics, ethics coming from the city of Zion in the future. But what is important in the book of Isaiah is that Isaiah doesn't stay there. It doesn't just speak about judgment only. Okay, it's interesting if you look at the structure of Isaiah. Right? If you just pay attention to the structure of Isaiah, you have each time he's talking about. You remember we have a first section. We have first the sin of Israel, then the nation, then in the second section of Isaiah the suffering of Israel, and then the nation. Each time, each section concludes with praise. With praise. And I'm going to read this to conclude. All these praises, this is where we should be when we conclude Isaiah. This should be our last note on Isaiah. Chapter 12, right? Verse 5 and 6. Sing to the Lord, for he has done excellent things. Cry out and shout, O inhabitant of Zion, for great is the Holy One of Israel in your midst. Chapter 35, this is the next praise. And it comes at a regular moment in the structure, really marking the end of the section in the book of Isaiah. Chapter 35, verse 2. again a praise. Chapter 35, verse 2. Yes, even with joy and singing. He's calling to joy and singing. And then verse 10. And the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy on their heads, and they shall obtain joy and gladness. You have the word which is repeated, joy, 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 and singing. Chapter 55, verse 12, now coming to the end of the book of itself. Chapter 55, verse 12. For you shall go out with joy again, and be led out with peace. Shall break forth into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. And then finally, and this will be our conclusion, because this is really the conclusion of the book of Isaiah. Okay? And this is the liturgical conclusion of the book of Isaiah. This is the way, in Jewish tradition, the book of Isaiah has been concluded. So for as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your descendants and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord. The last note is a note of a song, of a worship, of a joy, of a praise. That's where Isaiah wanted us to go. That's where Isaiah wanted us to reach a moment when we are receiving his promise, and we not just end with judgment, but end with praise. Thank you.